The WWE King of the Ring 2025 semifinals are officially set. Jey Uso defeated Bronson Reed, Rusev, and Sheamus to advance to a semifinal showdown with Cody Rhodes. That'll take place next week on Raw. Meanwhile, Randy Orton and Sami Zayn are on the other side of the bracket. That match will take place on SmackDown this week. As usual, there have been plenty of sort of hints and teases that WWE's been dropping as to what direction they may be headed in when it comes to this King of the Ring final at Night of Champions in a couple weeks, and of course, with the opportunity for the winner to go on and face the world champion on their brand at SummerSlam in August. The question is, again, what are we to believe? What are the red herrings? And where do we go from here with these Final Four? One of the most unique Final Fours in the history of a WWE tournament ever. Because when you really think about it, when's the last time in one of these tournaments you had four baby faces, all in the semifinals, each facing off for the opportunity, again, to go potentially win a world championship? We've not really, maybe if ever, seen that before in terms of this particular setup. Usually you'll have a couple heels in there to balance things, right? And all that. But no, these are arguably, among your biggest baby faces on the roster, and they're all competing for the opportunity to get another shot at a world championship. I know there's been some people who will look at this and say, well, maybe this isn't the way they should have gone. You want to try to do King of the Ring, give it to an up-and-comer, something like that. I don't think this is the old version of King of the Ring. This is kind of the new era, and the way they do it and what they're leading to with Night of Champions in Saudi Arabia, it's clear that they want to put, some of your top stars in there and have them compete for that opportunity. But when you think about the backstory and the history between these four, it does set up one of the most, again, unique dynamics we've ever seen in a tournament setting in WWE. Because if we look at each of these guys and some of the hints and the teas that WWE's dropping as to what's next for them, you can kind of figure out the picture of maybe what this is going to look like once we get to Night of Champions and beyond. Let's start with Cody Rhodes. He's the most obvious person in this because he is, of the group, someone who probably still has the highest profile, right? Cody pinned John Cena at Money in the Bank. And I said at that point, why should Cody care about King of the Ring? Because he's already pinned John Cena, and he should get an opportunity at the championship rematch because of that fact. He pinned him at Money in the Bank in the tag team match, and from that point, I thought, well, maybe they'll just go ahead and set that up, and it's all well and good. Cody gets his match, and we're on to the next thing. But because they kind of brought it up last week on SmackDown with Cody saying, hey, what are we going to do about this? I pinned you. That wasn't part of your big master plan that John Cena talked about. And so, what are we going to do here? Well, Cody's going to try to earn his way, possibly to that rematch. Any way you slice it, as I said, I think Cody's probably getting his rematch against John Cena at SummerSlam. That just seems the most logical at this point. So if you move beyond Cody and you go to Jey Uso, his opponent, right? Jey is certainly someone who just had the World Heavyweight Championship. Surprising loss maybe to some people when he lost to Gunther the previous week on Raw. And now Jey's trying to earn his way back into it. Whenever they announced that he was going to be the surprise entrant in this other qualifying match, I'm thinking, okay, this is pretty clear that Jey's probably going to win this thing, because as you were seeing the rest of the bracket shake out, you did look at it and say, well, they have Orton and Sami on one side, Cody and Jey makes all the sense because of the possible combinations that you could get in the final in Saudi Arabia, because again, it is kind of tying Jey into these other people, right? He has the history with Cody as former tag team champions. He has the history with Sami Zayn, which speaks for itself. Maybe not as much history with Randy Orton, but if you think about Survivor Series and those kind of things, they've been tied together before in terms of the history there. And so, these are all things. Now with Jey, who has every reason to kind of be in a position where with all the stuff they're looking forward to with him, the thing we're looking at the most is probably that potential Jey versus Sami match in a final, again, at Night of Champions. That would be the most compelling thing you could do with Jey. You go to Randy Orton. Well, Orton said last week on SmackDown, he doesn't mind kicking Cody's teeth down his throat if he has to, because it's all about getting another shot to be a world champion for Randy Orton. He had that shot against John Cena. Cena screwed him over at Backlash back in May. And so now Randy Orton kind of has what he needs, that motivation to get back to facing Cena once again and trying to, maybe not for the last time between these two, but trying to maybe disrupt this entire, John Cena retirement tour and finally win that championship from his biggest rival in WWE history. But then there's Sami Zayn. And we've said from the start, this all comes back to Sami Zayn. When you tie everything in with Sami, in my opinion, he still is, of this group, probably the most intriguing one because of everything they've been doing with the teases and everything. Look at what they did on Raw this week, right? Once again, the devil on Sami's shoulder was there. Karrion Kross, the backstage segment these two had. And it still have that same sort of vibe where Sami is basically talking to the bad version to say, hey, I don't believe this. This isn't true. Basically Sami's questioning everything from, as I said, sort of the devil on his shoulder figure in Karrion Kross. But it was made as clear as possible that they are going to finally do this Sami Zayn versus Karrion Kross match. And it's going to happen as soon as Sami is done with King of the Ring. Well, what sort of precipitated this thing? Well, it was because Karrion Kross said, hey, you're about to go face Randy Orton, right? The diabolical Randy Orton, the guy who will literally do anything. And he said as much last week on SmackDown. He would even destroy Cody Rhodes if he had to, like his brother. He would take out Cody for that opportunity to be champion again. And so, it's Randy Orton. It's the Viper. He's the snake, right? The guy that will do anything it takes, no matter the circumstances. He will punt you in the head if he has to, and that's just Randy Orton. It's always been that way. Can you ever fully trust Randy Orton? And so Karrion Kross is putting all of this into Sami's, head, right? And they're talking through this. But now that we know that the intention is clear, these two are going to have a match, one-on-one. To me, that was one of the biggest teases we need to know maybe the way this thing is going to play out. Because I said when you put this King of the Ring sort of bracket together and you looked at the potential final, to me it still looked like, all right, Cody versus Sami seems like the most intriguing potential final option based on, at the time, not knowing that Jay was in the tournament. Yes, I can understand you could do Cody versus Orton again. You kind of pushed the idea, and they have been on commentary, that Randy Orton was kind of in this situation last year, and then everything happened with sort of the controversial finish with Gunther and all that. So having Orton back in the mix and playing on the history with Orton and Cody, are we finally, after teasing it for what seems like a century, are we finally going to get that Randy Orton versus Cody Rhodes match, just maybe in a bit of a different setting than we thought previously? But again, Sami to me is the one that I think is most fascinating because he determines everything here when you really think about this entire story. Like, this feels like the story of Sami Zayn and the way this whole thing is played out, right? Because you have a couple options here with how they've teased it. Karrion Kross could simply get involved in the match on Friday between Sami and Randy Orton, and somehow that cost Sami the opportunity to advance. Or it could be what Karrion Kross said. Sami's just simply not willing to go to the lengths that a Randy Orton is to get a shot at winning back a championship. So if Sami keeps bringing up the idea that he's finally going to get the world championship and it's closer than ever, he said it himself on Raw, but yet he's still not willing to do whatever it takes. Is that going to be the thing that costs Sami? Meanwhile, Randy Orton will do whatever he has to. And so that's the difference. So maybe Karrion Kross doesn't have to get involved in the match on SmackDown, but what Kross has said does prove to be true. And so, if that's the case, then again, you're kind of setting up the one-on-one match between the two. And there's also the possibility that, again, if Sami Zayn loses, do you do Karrion Kross versus Sami Zayn at Night of Champions? Because Sami said he was immediately, once he was done with the King of the Ring, was going to immediately go to Adam Pearce and say that he wants this match. So if that happens on SmackDown on Friday, then you have a little bit of time, not a lot, but a little bit, to add Sami Zayn to the card in Saudi Arabia, which just seems like he's going to be on there some way, somehow. And do you have that match there? And maybe that is kind of the moment where that is a turning point for Sami Zayn in this match against Karrion Kross. And then, like we said, look further down the line. If Sami doesn't win King of the Ring, does he return next year, early next year, and win the Royal Rumble? And that sets up the arc for Sami to go on to potentially win his first ever world championship at WrestleMania 42. Or does Sami bring out a little bit of that extra edge or whatever, right? Where he is going into this match with Randy Orton knowing he needs a little something extra. And if he does that, well, he wins and he advances maybe to face Cody Rhodes, which does, to me, still set up, one of the more interesting finals that maybe you've ever had in a tournament with Sami and Cody, based on, again, their past history as friends and everything that Cody went through with Kevin Owens and sort of Sami kind of being in between of that whole thing. You go back to earlier this year, right? You remember the visual where Cody did whatever it took to destroy Kevin Owens, and you've got Sami down there beside his fallen friend. So that could also play into how they want to do this thing in the King of the Ring final. So again, I think when you look at the whole thing and the way they've been teasing this, to me it all comes back to Sami and Karrion Kross. And I like the fact that, as I said before, it's a little bit more unpredictable now because you do have such a unique Final Four here that you really can't feel like you can accurately predict necessarily which version you're going to get in the final. I'll admit, I don't think Jay's advancing. I think Cody beating Jay is probably the right move here. And so, if you have Cody advance, then it really comes down to, do you do Cody versus Sami? Do you do Cody versus Randy Orton? And really, it all depends on, to me, one thing, and that's the teases they've been doing with Sami and Karrion Kross. Do they want to do Sami Zayn versus Karrion Kross at Night of Champions? If they do, then obviously you have Orton beat Sami, and then you do Cody versus Orton. That's your big showdown, huge final for the opportunity to move on. Now, there is somewhat of an issue with that scenario, and that's that I don't know how many people think that Randy Orton is actually going to beat Cody Rhodes, knowing that you're probably setting up Cody versus Cena again. And so I don't know that I would completely buy that. And like I said, this whole thing for me, I don't think Cody needs to win King of the Ring because he already has pinned John Cena. So I don't know that Cody needs this, but the way that they're setting it up, it does feel like maybe that's, right now, if you're picking the favorites, he may be the favorite. Because otherwise, Sami Zayn's probably your second favorite. Based on, like we said, if they set up the idea that he were to win this King of the Ring, go on to face Gunther at SummerSlam. It's not going to be Goldberg. We'll talk about that in another video. But if he goes on to face Gunther, Rollins cashes in, you do the full story to get back to Sami versus Rollins, maybe next year at WrestleMania. That is an option. But all these little things, all these teases and hints, right, between Cody and Seth Rollins, and again, all the backstory between all these guys, that's what's making this work right now. And so, what's going to happen? Who's it going to come down to? Is it going to be Cody versus Orton? Is it going to be Cody versus Sami? Is Jay going to surprise us all and we do get that Jay versus Sami final? I'm not sure about that. But there are plenty of ways you can go with this. And I think, again, it all comes down to which of these little hints that WWE's been dropping, with Sami Zayn in particular, I think is the one that's going to make the biggest difference here and decide which final we're getting and ultimately who's going to win this thing. Is it as simple as Cody Rhodes, or does Sami find a way to win the King of the Ring and we do get kind of that sort of, classic scenario where Sami cashes or wins against Gunther, Seth Rollins cashes in, and we're off and running to Sami's Royal Rumble triumph potentially early next year. You guys let me know what you think. Now that the semifinals are set, Cody Rhodes versus Jey Uso, Randy Orton versus Sami Zayn, how do you see this playing out? Give me your predictions for the King of the Ring semifinals and your prediction for the final in Saudi Arabia coming up in a couple weeks at Night of Champions. Always appreciate you watching. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button as well, and give me your predictions for all these wild scenarios that could play out in the King of the Ring semifinals.